But they no, up above. Yeah, but is there one attendee? Really? What? Oh, okay.
Nothing that I.
Okay, can you promote Sean? The rest of it?
I would have been happy.
Neither. It wasn't anything.
So. Come to order, please. Thank you. Mark, there are some of board members who were on the attendee list, and Mark is promoting them. Good evening and welcome to the Community Board 2 Land Use and Housing meeting of today is May 15th. This meeting was asterisked tonight and for May 29th, but we've already had our public hearing, so that's been adjusted. This is a business and informational session. Non-board members who are here or are on Zoom, participate as allowed by the chair. My name is Katie Bordenaro. I'm co-chair of the Land Use and Housing Committee. My colleague Eugene Yu, who's also the co-chair, will not be able to be with us this evening. So I'll be point person for everybody. And I'll just, we'll go around the room and say your name.
Laura Cabona, board member.
Frederica Siegel.
Board member. Michael Levine, board member and committee member.
Susan Wittenberg, same board member, committee member.
Donna Raftery, board member, committee member.
David Gruber, board member and committee member.
And I believe, John Paul, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, committee member.
Thank you, John Paul DeVerne. Are there any other committee members on
Committee member.
that I don't have the Zooms on?
Shauna.
You have the chair and you have.
And the chair of CB2 is with us. Want to say good evening, Susan?
And Ryder is here.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you, Susan Kent. We have other board members present.
Hi, I'm Ryder Kessler. I'm a board member, but not a committee member.
Yes. Valerie, you want to say hello, please? Very mysterious.
Oh, I know, I'm blurry, but hello.
Hello.
Valerie DeRosa, also board member. I think we've introduced everybody. And most, our primary person tonight is George James, who will be giving us his analysis of City of ES housing opportunity from our vantage point. He helped us out with economic opportunity. So thank you, George, for continuing with us. And I'll turn it over to you so we can all hear what your thoughts are.
Okay, great. Let me share my screen. Okay. And 1 second. Yep. 1 second, please.
Order, may I have the attendance?
You may. I said it first.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. All right. So, all right. Let's talk about what I'm going to talk about tonight. So first, I'd like to start with just correcting some things. When I was before you in April, we didn't have the text. We had a scoping document. We've since then have everything has been referred out to the community boards. We have the text, and 1 second here. Let me see if I can get this full screen mode, which I'm having a little trouble with right now. But while I'm trying to figure that out, I will keep talking. So there are a few things that that when I was with you that I got wrong and I need to correct. Number one, and it's really very important to you, is when I was before you, we talked about how floor area can be transferred from landmarks. And because the text of the scoping document wasn't very clear, I thought it would be landmarks and historic districts. But when we got the text, the actual zoning text, it's clear that it's just landmarks. So if you're in a historic district but not landmarked, you cannot transfer your floor area widely. From a question that I got from Mark, there are 89 landmarks in your district. They are all on green on this map right here, the green dots. And this is the graphic that DCP is using to describe where and how the floor area from a landmark can be transferred. So if you have a landmark on the corner here, you can transfer it anywhere in the block or on lots that face that block. In actuality, though, it's really more like this, because floor area moves from zoning lot to zoning lot. So if you could move your floor area across the street, that site could be in a zoning lot that covers all or part of this lot or block and can go anywhere on this block. So really, it's with creative people forming their zoning lots in ways that benefit themselves, you can get at least this far. One of the things we're exploring right now is what happens if you transfer floor area from a landmark here to a landmark here to a landmark there. Can you actually chain these together and get them further? I think you can, but we're still exploring that.
Amazing.
Yes.
Or is it the question?
So just quickly, so if you're in a district, someone has to say, or someone has to, can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yes, I can.
Someone has to declare that you're a non-conforming use within the district. You're not a landmark building within the district. Is that what you're saying?
It's not about non-conforming uses, right? This doesn't actually affect.
There are many buildings in landmark districts that are non buildings.
Yeah.
So they're not landmark quality buildings, but they're in the district. Those are not eligible to transfer.
Those are not eligible, yes. And I may have left you with that impression from last time, and I need to correct that. And I apologize. It is only landmarks.
Who determines whether you're a contributing building or not?
It doesn't even matter if you're contributing. It's only individual landmarks.
Only landmarks.
Only individual landmarks.
There are only 89.
We have 89.
And there are 89.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, and again, that was my fault, and I apologize for it.
Okay, good. We don't have to pay you now.
Yeah.
You're a judge.
So in addition to landmark transfers, you can get floor area from the underlying FAR. You could get plaza and arcade bonuses. You could get, so the new one, transfers from the mid blocks to the wide streets. And so this is a significant change by allowing floor area from, generally low scale contextual mid block districts to be transferred to the wide streets with a higher density. We normally have never allowed that before. And this is a change that is being promoted with housing opportunity. We've also in relatively recently, 2021, we amended the zoning to expand subway improvement bonuses. And now we have the affordable housing bonus, UAP, Universal Affordability Program. And the UAP, that's part of housing opportunity, provides a 20% FAR bonus, all of which must be used for affordable housing. So UAP permanently encumbers the land, because that affordable housing is permanent, with a deed restriction for floor area that would only be used for affordable housing. So my question is, and this is a question that I'm still exploring, but I think you all should think about this. Why would developers use UAP bonuses when they have other options to get floor area, and the UAP floor area would have to be entirely affordable, right? If you're getting a 20% bonus for UAP, you have to devote that entire thing to affordable housing. Wouldn't it be easier to get a landmark transfer or transfer from a mid-block, or maybe even a subway improvement bonus? This is a concern of mine that I'm throwing out there. I don't actually have the answer, but it's something that I'm thinking about as somebody who is concerned about affordable housing, and that this is the only affordable housing program in this new zoning. You know, it's very much unlike zoning for quality and affordability, which essentially tried to use zoning relief as an incentive for affordable housing. So some of you've been around a while. This was like 8 years ago, 9 years ago. ZQA initially proposed relaxing all of these zoning restrictions for projects with affordable housing. If you had affordable housing, you got the benefit. If you didn't get the benefit. But most of those changes that they tried to adopt in 2015, 2016 were not ultimately adopted, and they were not made law. And now we're seeing some of those same things that were tried to be made law, like the changes to the sliver law, which, you know, 8 years ago we said, well, we'll give you zoning relief for the sliver law if it's affordable housing. Now it's being proposed for any type of housing, no affordability required. And, you know, to me, again, personally, seems like a missed opportunity to get more affordable housing.
Can I ask a question?
Okay, committee?
Yeah.
Yes, the committee is amenable.
I appreciate the committee's generosity. I have 2 questions about the things you just said.
Yeah.
One is in terms of the developer's incentive to use UAP when there's other options for getting more area. Are those mutually exclusive? Like could you get the subway improvement FAR and also UAP?
Absolutely. You can add these together. Absolutely.
So it's really like, why would they add it? Why would they add the UAP? Is they'll take the other stuff, but for adding the UAP, my second question is my understanding from last week is that the affordable units get mixed in through the whole building.
Yes,
would it be your assessment that like having the additional height would increase the value of the market rate units throughout, so that maybe that would be a good reason for them to decide on the additional density or height?
right. So that would be the reason, right? Is if you want extra height. However, let me say this, is that the way a lot of these buildings right now in the inclusionary housing program that are being developed is in the Manhattan core, the market is demanding condos, home ownership units, and rental housing is really difficult to provide in home ownership units. So what they have been doing is building the condo, and then right next door to the condo, a little rental building on the same zoning lot. So that way they're not mixed up in the same building because they are different buildings. And so if you're in CB2, and I think that this is true in your district, I'm not a real estate person, but I think condos are really what's being demanded. And if you have a substantial condo, you're probably going to build 2 different buildings, one affordable and one not.
Interesting. Is that would be allowed under?
Yes. Yeah, as long as it's on the same zoning lot. Yeah. Or there are provisions for offsite, but they're limited.
Go ahead, Frederick.
Doesn't that produce a 4-door?
Yes. Yes, it does.
And that's not allowed.
But
Well,
they're separate buildings.
they're separate buildings. And so because
it does not produce a 4-door.
It
well,
produces a building.
this is the poor building with a door that's right next to the other building.
Effectively, it's still a 4-door.
George, I think we have one of those. Do we have one of those in Hudson Square, David? I think we have one building like that in Hudson.
We have one building, but it's a zigzag building.
Yeah.
And it's so configured that the 4-door is on one of the zigs and not one of the zags.
Right, that's how they got around it.
Okay.
So George, just on that. The outcome that you described, there are not a whole lot of options in our board. For the typical building, which a lot of development is smaller buildings.
Yes.
And it's not the larger buildings, and most of those, as we discussed last week with, what was it John mentioned, the luxury development. So the incentivization, I mean, from what you see of creating a rental unit in a condo building, it's just seems very complicated if it's for just a couple units.
Oh,
And-
and you can waive them out if it's a small building, right? If you're, I
Right.
think, what, fewer than 9 or fewer than 10, you don't have to provide any.
And I just feel like, that seems to be more of an issue, right, of production of units of a little extra everywhere. There's just no incentivization to do
Well,
it there, or to take that benefit and put it somewhere else.
Well, I remember, the philosophy behind City of Yes for housing opportunity really is about market rate housing, right? It's about a little bit more market rate housing in every neighborhood. And if you want to do affordable housing, great, we'll give you a bonus for it. But none of these things are conditioned on affordable housing, like none of them, right? It's about housing. And if I may, I'll segue into this slide, because this is something that I thought I think this is really important. And this is not something that is being brought up by DCP or anyone. I didn't even realize this until I actually read the zoning. But how we're doing a little more housing in every neighborhood is effectively removing or weakening residential standards for buildings that have been in place since before I was born. Some of these have been around for 100 years. So we're reducing rear yards from 30 feet to 20 feet. As long as you're below 75 feet. So for most buildings in your district, it'll be, go from 30 feet to 20 feet. Reduce the size of courts for legal windows from 1,200 square feet to 800 square feet. Reduce the sides of side yards from 8 feet to 5 feet. Reduce distance between buildings on the same lot from 60 feet to 40 feet. Increase the maximum lot coverage from 70 to 80% for interior and through lots. And this one, it's astounding. Reduce the space needed for legal windows from 30 feet to 20 feet. And that's just such a big change. This is, getting legal light and air for habitable rooms has shaped our city and the buildings in it, and we're reducing it from 30 feet to 20 feet. Making residential open space optional, removing the yard requirements entirely from large lots and through lots that are attached to corner lots. To me, this is these are the standards that have shaped the city. And, I think, reviewing standards that have shaped the city actually is something that's really healthy to do and make certain they all make sense. But I would have liked to seen this something that you start with. Make certain people understand this, and you go through all of the reasons why you're doing this, and you spell it out for folks so that people are understanding what kind of decisions they're being asked to make.
I think Michael Levine has a question.
Yeah, I have a question, and I think I asked this last week. Do any of these proposed actions require building code amendments? And if so, isn't that beyond the scope of this action? Would it not require additional actions? I don't recall if I asked it last week, and I'm asking it now. What would your answer be?
I don't think so, Michael. I mean, if there is something, there might be something in the housing maintenance code,
Right.
but that's not part of this action, right? So we're just changing zoning, and if there is another action they need to take in the housing maintenance code or the building code, they would do it afterward.
Afterward.
But as far as I'm aware, I'm more aware of the zoning, right? And Michael, that these are big changes, right? They've been around as long as I've been around, as long as you've been around, right? It's
Right.
these are very big deals, and again, I don't want to fetishize standards, right? You know, because things can change and they probably should change at some point. But I think it's important to actually be very transparent about changes. And I've been disappointed with the fact that, you know, I had to discover these by reading the text myself. No one has brought them to our attention. And you know, this is, you know, I will say this, is that many of these were adopted to ensure minimum light and air for habitable rooms for health and comfort of residents. And so, you know, there's a fundamental question here is, have we determined that these standards were wrong? That we don't need so much light and air for health and comfort. And I'm not being, you know, this is actually an honest question. You know, when these standards went into effect, we didn't have air conditioning. Right? We now have air conditioning. When these standards went into effect, lighting your home was very expensive. And so you wanted to use as much daylight as you could. It's not that way anymore. And so is it reasonable to make these changes? Here's the thing. I just don't think I've been given enough information, or at least rationale, that I feel comfortable about this. I wish I had more information. And I wish I had more information that I could share with you about this.
Understood.
Okay, the rest of this is going to deal with questions that I got from Mark. And these questions were great because a lot of them are very practical. Like, what does this mean in these situations? And it forces you to actually apply the rules to places to figure them out. So one of the questions I had was, can townhouses add a carriage house in the garden, in their gardens, or which I've interpreted as their rear yard, as a result of this proposal? And the answer is probably. So the way the ADUs work is that one ADU, 800 square feet or less, can be added to the rear yard of any 1 or 2 family unit as a permitted obstruction in the yard. So it's like it's not there in the yard. That permitted obstruction is limited to 2 stories or 25 feet and cannot exceed 50% of the required rear yard. But remember, the required rear yard now is only 20 feet, right? If it's freestanding, it has to be at least 5 feet from the lot line. So that's for 1 and 2 family homes. Multiple dwellings can add residential space to the rear yard, up to 100% of the rear yard, as long as the space is not used for dwelling purposes. So it could be like a common room, a mail room, a laundry room, part of a lobby, you know, playroom, whatever. It just can't be used for a dwelling. And it can only be 15 feet tall. So to answer the question is, consequently, you know, 1 and 2 family homes can add the ADU to the rear yard, but multiple dwellings can't. And none of this floor area that's being added needs to be affordable or have any affordability. Okay, is there a height cap in the UAP program? Yes, but there are options. And I think it's important to understand what the options are in the height and setback rules. So I'm going to use an R6 district as an example. So without UAP and you're on a small lot, the standard rules would apply in the R6. It's to height to 75 feet if you're on a wide street. With UAP, the R6 would be 95 feet, regardless of the width of the street you're on. So that's a pretty big increase if you're on a narrow street, because the narrow street R6 is 55 feet. So then with or without UAP, but on a lot of 20,000 square feet or more, the R6 height limit is 125 feet. With or without UAP, but on an expanded lot of 40,000 square feet or more, which I mean, they're now allowing lots to cross streets. And so these expanded lots, you know, you would have like a zoning lot merger expanding your lot across streets to reach 40,000 square feet. The height limit ends up being 156 feet.
Oh.
Yeah, it goes up when you're adding these these little percentages to, I mean, here's what the concept is. The concept is that in R6 are often height factor buildings, which can sometimes be very tall. And so if you have a big lot, you can put in another very tall building in the height factor on the housing estate, on the campus. In that case, they're not using open space, residential open space or open space ratios anymore, but they are limiting the coverage to 50% on those big lots when you do infill there. And so, this is a complicated question because heights vary according to the presence or absence of UAP, the size of the lot, and sometimes the width of the street.
George, before you move on.
Yeah.
I just put a perspective of 40,000 square foot lot in CB2 is pretty limited of where one might find that.
Carter,
So,
my building.
That's 20, yeah, that's,
2,000 square
that's-
feet.
yeah, that-
It's building in Soho.
right. So 20 by 100 lot, right? Which we have quite a
yeah,
few.
that's tiny. Yeah.
That's 20 of those put together.
So let me comment on that. Is that this is about zoning lots, not tax lots. And so it is within everybody's interest to make a large zoning lot with lots of owners. Because if you make a large zoning lot with lots of owners, that means that those owners can do more on their lots than they can if they're on a small zoning lot. So I see over time, this is something that people are going to have to figure out, but I see over time people going, oh yeah, let's merge the zoning lots on this block and have more flexibility with what we can do with our own properties. Right? They wouldn't necessarily trade, right now we mostly see zoning lot mergers for legal windows or for the transfer of floor area. This gives you other reasons to do it.
Got it. And that's how people also, I rephrase that. That's where on Bowery and 4th Street, we have a large office building. That's a huge zoning lot, if I remember correctly, that was cobbled together of many different owners and properties, just how the air rights were all transferred through that. So that would be an example of that.
Yeah, well, yes, but again, I would say that you might see some of these where they're not transferring floor area. Everybody's keeping their floor area, but they can build their building taller.
Got it.
Okay. Explain the elimination of the sliver law on CB2. Okay, so first of all, what is the sliver law? So currently, the sliver law limits buildings less than 45 feet wide to the width of the street if it's not adjacent to taller buildings, right? And if it's adjacent to taller buildings, it can go up to either its zoning height or that height of the taller building. In CB2, this generally means that buildings on small lots are height limited more than the underlying zoning. So I picked out the R72 district around Washington Square Park. The R72, you could get a building up to 75 feet. But, most of the streets down here are only 50 feet wide, right? And so the fact that they're only 50 feet wide and they're mostly small buildings, that means that you can never get up to your 75-foot height limit, right? In this area, you're limited by the sliver law to 50 feet. And so housing opportunity would allow the underlying zoning rule, would allow the underlying zoning to rule, right? So it would be, all right, so you're in an R72 district, you could go up to 75 feet. It doesn't matter if your lot is less than 45 feet or not. And if UAP is used, meaning if it becomes affordable, you can get up to 115 feet. But UAP is not necessary to exempt the building from sliver. Again, this was one of the things they tried to change in 2016. If you had an affordable building, you could be exempt from sliver. In this case, they're just exempting everything from sliver. Will individual landmarks be able to transfer their in CB2 be able to transfer their floor area? Yes, all of them will be able to transfer their floor area, as I described earlier, if they have floor area left to transfer. But again, floor area is not transferred from a landmark. It is transferred from a zoning lot that has a landmark. So even if a landmark has used up all of their development rights, it is possible that a enterprising person could obtain additional floor area from a larger zoning lot merger and then transfer that additional floor area using the ability to transfer from the landmark. It's definitely possible that people could have a lot of fun playing games with making zoning lots to transfer floor area that's not generated on the landmark site. Floor area transfers, again, and from landmarks, none of this requires UAP. None of this requires any affordability. What is a list of sites in CB2 which can be classified as campuses? And there isn't one, and there won't be. Any zoning lot with a zoning district without a letter suffix, so R6, R72, R8, R9, R10, and their commercial equivalents, which is like C16, C17, qualifies for the so-called campus height limits if the zoning lot it's on is over 20,000 square feet. So consequently, any land zoned R6, R72, R8, R9, R10 could conceivably be considered a campus if its zoning lot was at least 20,000 square feet. This is an issue of definition. They chose to define this very broadly so that basically any height factor zoning site could be qualified for as being a campus and all the benefits that gives it if the zoning lot is crafted carefully.
George, I'm going to ask a question.
Yep.
We're very proud of our interior donuts, with the townhouses that have these contiguous gardens that are undeveloped. So they could combine all into one zoning lot and put something in the middle, as, become like a campus and then put a building in the middle.
Well, that's interesting. That's an interesting thought. I hadn't really thought of that one. I'd have to think about that one a little bit more, because you're still going to have window requirements, because most of these buildings have rear-facing windows, and you have a rear yard there for legal light and air to those to the back. So I'm not sure.
The rear yard requirement just got smaller, George.
Well, that's true, right? But what you will see, and I know this is going to happen, is you're going to have people filling up their rear yards with buildings, right? If it's a multiple dwelling, again, you could have a 15-foot building cover the entire rear yard, and it complies. You can have your playroom, right? Or if it is a the accessory dwellings could be either attached or detached in your rear yard. And so, folks are looking for ways to expand. It will be easier to get landmark approval for anything you do in your rear yard because you can't see it from the street in most cases. And so I would see a lot of people who are looking to expand and have a little bit more room see the rear yards in the back as the green field. And so I think maybe folks will get together and do something, bigger with the campuses. But I think the obvious thing is folks like a little bit more room, and they have trouble sometimes going up because of landmarks, and this allows them to go back.
Well, this won't, under that scenario, which sounds very plausible, it won't create more housing units. It will. Necessarily, so which
not necessarily. It could create one ADU for single family and 2-family homes, but I also think that it's more likely that those homes are just going to make themselves bigger as opposed to make an ADU.
I agree.
Right.
I agree.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What are all the landmarks in CD2? You're not supposed to read this. There are 89 landmarks. They're all here. But I'm going to tell you right now, it's impossible to tell if they have floor area to transfer without a research into each site. And we'll have to amend this slide a little bit. But the idea here is that ultimately landmarks are in zoning lots. Zoning lots, there is no database of zoning lots, so we don't know if they've used all their development rights. We can make assumptions based upon tax lots, but very often landmarks have done something with their rights either themselves or in zoning lot mergers with neighbors. So it's really hard to know without a lot of work what's going to happen with some of these sites. What are all the zoning districts in CD2? This is, we put a list together. Obviously I'm going to give this to Mark after the meeting. And then, I'm here to answer more questions, but I do want to bring up a couple, just one thing. So one of the things I also found very disturbing about this proposal, and I'm saying this as a land use planner who believes in public decision making and in the process, is that there's a lot of things in here that are not featured in any of the materials other than the zoning text itself. Meaning DCP is coming in here and talking about a lot of things, but there are a lot of things they're not talking about. And so and that are not even on the form. You're asked to fill out a form on your comments. There are a bunch of things that aren't even mentioned. So I'm going to give you an example. So City of Yes for Housing Opportunity vastly increases the use of City Planning Commission authorizations. One of them, ZR 7525, is a bulk modification for non-complying buildings. This authorization would allow any building built before 1990 to go to the CPC and ask for an increase in the size of the building by 25% of its zoning height and 20% of its floor area limit. So let's say you're in a building that's already built out. If this passes, it's not built out anymore. And it doesn't matter where it is. You can get a 20%, you can get an increase of 20% through a CPC authorizations. They're discretionary actions. Authorizations are discretionary actions. They can say no, but they are non-ULUR, which means your council member is not involved in that decision. And the CPC holds no public hearing. So if your neighbor wants to make their building 20% bigger, you have no one to complain to. You have no one to tell your opinion to. The CPC is going to make that decision without hearing from you. Now, they will ask the CB, the community board, for your opinion on the authorization, but your opinion is only advisory and you don't have to hold a hearing on it.
George has a question. Do you want to answer it now or wait? He has two more points, Michael.
Let me finish my 2 points. All right. So, and again, no affordable housing is required for this, right? Could be just, a single family home that somebody wants to increase. And again, it just needs to be said again that the council member and the public have no mechanism to provide comments to the CPC before it makes their decision. The CPC is an unelected body, right? That has representatives from Staten Island and Queens and the Bronx, and they're going to be making decisions on individual sites without hearing from the public. This is radical. From a land use planning standpoint, this is unbelievably radical. And it's not how we make discretionary land use decisions. Buried on page 898 and not mentioned anywhere else. And I'm sorry I'm getting a little upset about this, but this is just, to me, this is just not how you do planning, and this is not how you do engagement with the community, and this is not how you deal with community boards. They have a responsibility to explain their proposal, and they haven't done it.
Okay, thank you, George. And Michael has a question, and then I'll follow up.
are there not conditions attached to the grant of the authorization?
Absolutely, right. There are findings that they have to make. No doubt.
Now, are those findings compatible with the surrounding district, minimum impact? What are those findings and are they listed anywhere?
Yeah, they're listed in it. I can pop it up. I don't have them off the top of my head, but I can certainly pop it up and read them to you. Oh, here we go. Findings. In order to grant such authorization, the commission shall find that the configuration of the existing building, proximity to other buildings, or other site conditions create practical difficulties in complying with the applicable residential bulk regulations and would adversely affect the configuration of residences and the buildings or site plan. For enlargement where applicable, the proposed modifications would not unduly obstruct access to light and air to adjoining properties and streets. The proposed scale and placement relates harmoniously to the surrounding area. The requested modification is the least amount necessary.
Those are the standard conditions, yeah,
All subjective.
right.
They are subjective, and I got to tell you, a couple of years ago, I challenged a CPC special permit which had this unduly access light and air, and what we did was we actually measured the amount of light and air that was lost, meaning using solar simulations to actually calculate the amount, and that gave the commission pause because they had never seen it. They had seen shadow studies, but they had never seen solar access studies. And they were just like, yeah, it loses 40% of its light, but that doesn't matter. Right? And so these are, there's not like an objective measurement, will not reduce light by X%. It is unduly. And this wouldn't be here if the commission wasn't ready to grant it. And let me also say again, people cannot comment on this. There is no mechanism to comment on a CPC authorization. There is no hearing. There is no comment period. And that's.
But isn't it frequently referred to a community board for an opinion, even though it's not official?
Yes, of course. Yes, you will be asked your opinion. There's no doubt about it. But let me also say this. You're not the neighbor. Right. And the neighbors, they have a right. I mean, in my humble opinion on land use, and we play by a rule book. It is zoning. If we want to change the zoning, there's a hearing. You get involved. There's a process. You can talk with your community board. You can talk with your council member. There's none of that here. No way to appeal to anybody.
I think that Bo has a question.
No.
You're okay?
Yeah. Thanks.
Oh. But you say this is one thing that has
This
struck.
is one thing, yes. And there are so many others. This is like one thing that this is one thing that there's a bunch of other things where you would read it and go, yeah, who cares? Right? So it's all mixed up together in this big potpourri of stuff, some of which is really significant and others of which aren't, right? And I don't know, I find it's all very disturbing to me because, again, there are certain standards of practice which just my colleagues at the department have failed.
Well, actually, Katie,
Go ahead, Bo.
so George, it seems to me that, you said it, the DCP proposed this, so they want it, right? Obviously.
Absolutely.
They wouldn't have proposed it if they didn't want it. This is not a public hearing. This is, we can say whatever we want, but it doesn't really matter. They don't have to listen to us and they won't. So do you have any suggestion about what our next move is?
Well, I mean, listen, I think DCP, but especially your elected officials, take the opinions of community boards very seriously. Here's the thing about community boards. Your recommendation is advisory, but you go first. And because community boards go first, you set the tone. And I think for this, that will be very powerful. I know I've been talking with some folks out in Eastern Queens, and they are losing their mind because there are big changes in the low density districts and that haven't been touched in forever, right?
Yeah.
Your issues are different, right? The high density changes are different, and in fact, they're probably not as dramatic as the low density districts are. But ultimately, community boards have power in numbers, and so if you have opinions, carefully craft your recommendation, and talk about what you like and what you don't like. And I think you have a process and you've got to use it.
Just 1 minute. Did you promote Matthew Metzger to panelist?
Yes.
Okay, good. I didn't see that.
With
Thank
my thanks. Thank you very much.
you. Okay, thank you. Oh, yes, Frederica.
Are you finished with answering our questions?
Yeah, that was all the questions I had or were able to answer.
right.
There were some that were kind of I was not able to answer them.
All right, I hope that mine don't fall into that category, but let me give it a shot. Are there any changes to the adaptive reuse regulations that would affect CB2?
There are changes to the adaptive reuse. You mean Article 1, Chapter 5. I have to review those. They're most of the changes to those regulations are about expanding them so that it covers the entire city, right? And that right now they only apply to certain community districts, and only on certain buildings, depending on how old they are. They're expanding it to cover more areas, and they're expanding the age of buildings that it qualifies to. I have not looked at it to see how it would impact, the details, how the details impact this. Well, let me change that. So right now, the way it works is that you could only do these conversions to housing units, and now they want to make it so that you can convert them to dorms, or you can convert them to supportive housing or other types of housing units. And so that's a fairly significant change, but that would happen everywhere.
Well, maybe if you can just look into that.
I will.
and-
Let me look into that. And again, please give me more questions. I don't know
Sure.
everything. I haven't had, again, 1,386 pages text. I still have more to learn.
Okay, could you explain what removing or reducing the dwelling unit factor would mean to CB2?
Okay.
And also maybe you'll explain a little bit about the dwelling unit factor.
So I think this is an important issue. So the dwelling unit factor is a factor that has been in zoning since 1961. And it essentially prohibits the development of buildings with all small units. You can build a building with small units, but they need to be balanced by larger units. The idea here is that you didn't want all studios because the city is a city with with families and people who need larger apartments. But you could also build, you could still build the small buildings, but you had to average out the way it is now to 680 square feet of residential floor area. So if you wanted to build all 400 square foot studios, you couldn't do it. So that's what the dwelling unit factor is. They want to eliminate it so you can build all tiny units. I don't think it's going to have an enormous issue in CB2 because what we're seeing in the Manhattan core is that people are building condos, they're building big units, they're building units that don't even come close to the 680 square feet. We're going to see buildings with all studios in East Harlem and Central Harlem. Which is exactly the types of units they don't need, right? They need family-sized units, but the market is demanding tiny little studios for young urban professionals in places where the land value is lower. The real missed opportunity was actually using the dwelling unit factor to prevent the development of buildings that are enormous, what I call the Bigfoot buildings that are, 50 or 100,000 square feet with 11 units, right? With triplexes and quadplexes, which we have, right? We were seeing these enormous buildings going in. There's one on Madison Avenue that went in with 5,000, with over 5,000 square foot average unit size. We could have done something, we could have changed zoning to prevent that, right? So that, you know, you would only average 2,000 or 2,500 square feet. You could still have your enormous units, but then you would need to have some smaller units to balance it out. So it's a big change. I don't think it's going to affect this community district much because, you know, people want the bigger units when they're building here.
First Matthew, because he hasn't spoken, then Bo, then Michael.
Very much appreciated. Question for you. Do you think that our lack of building residential areas residential spaces has had any impact on the market demand north of us? I note that you said that 1-bedroom and studios are being demanded by the market because of people who look a lot like me. And I would note that we have not built enough down here. And so I was just wondering if you saw any connection between them.
Oh, okay. So this is the fundamental premise of housing opportunity. The idea is that you build more housing, market rate housing everywhere, and then prices will go down. Which that might be true. I don't know. This is something that it's a philosophy, and there is some research behind it. There are other people who say, you know, if people aren't making money off of new development, they just stop developing. But here's what I do know, is that community district boundaries are really so small that a supply side approach really isn't going to affect the prices so much within a community district. And a lot of the community districts in lower Manhattan or in Manhattan core are really craving affordable housing. And when I say affordable housing, I mean rent regulated housing, housing for people of truly limited means, because it's been hemorrhaging it. And you know, it's amazing how much has been lost. And I don't know, and I don't think, in my humble opinion, that a supply side approach in the Manhattan core will change meaningfully affordable housing for folks that need it the most.
So just to clarify, you think that they're unconnected?
At the local level, at the CB2 level, yes. I think if you look at the city as a whole or the metropolitan area, it might not be unconnected. But you know, I am now serving Community District 2.
Okay. Next is Bo and then Michael.
Yeah, well, just getting back to the dwelling unit factor, I remember last week, John Mangan was specifically asked if there was any way that zoning could be used to preclude the reduction of units in a larger building. You know, we see that all the time. You know, somebody goes into a 4-unit building and makes it a single family dwelling. So I'm just wondering if the dwelling unit factor can somehow be used to create an argument against that.
So, okay, so John's position is that it's not legal to do that. I think he's wrong.
Yes,
I've consulted with, I mean, listen, we regulate so much in zoning, not only here, but I mean, look at other jurisdictions. And the fact that you could say that with a straight face, it seems ridiculous to me. And I've consulted with other attorneys and they're like, yeah, no, you could do that. But his position, and he's not backed down from it, is that it's not legal. I think his you know, I mean, I speculate that, you know, this is a deregulation effort. This is about reducing regulations to essentially make all housing easier to develop and in more places. And so therefore you don't want to add regulations to like that, because that would be adding regulations. And I think that's really as simple as it is, Michael. That's it.
Michael, do you still have a question?
Yeah, the question, a little slightly different subject, and I don't know who presented this, maybe it was DCP. Did they not say that there would be additional, that the zoning text change would allow the creation of additional districts that don't exist with a
Yes.
higher FAR? Can you
Yes.
remind me, is it limited to certain areas? How would that affect us and where would it happen? Because that is frightening. It would require a Euler to map it in our district, but what are the districts they're talking about?
Okay, so yes, they are adding some flavors to the R6. But the one that people are talking about are R11 and R12, which would
Right.
be
That's
mapped as, I believe, don't quote me, as a 15 FAR mandatory 15 and 18 FAR mandatory inclusionary housing areas, right? So that would, if you put it on a map, it would be an MIH area and would require affordable housing. However, they're not putting it on a map, right? Essentially, they are putting it on a shelf, getting ready to put on a map. I will say this is that this is the part that actually it doesn't bother me because it's not on a map. And if it's not on a map, then it's not in effect. I think it made a lot of sense when they did it with the manufacturing districts because the manufacturing districts were really lumpy, and having some gradations in between made perfect sense. But a lot of people are concerned about these extra zoning districts, but really, again, they don't change anything until they're put on a map.
And that would require a full Euler.
Yes, that's right.
Frederica and then Matthew.
So you mentioned mandatory inclusionary housing, and I remember that resolution. I remember the resolution for quality and affordability.
Yeah.
I remember the Hudson Square rezoning and the Soho NoHo rezoning and the voluntary inclusionary housing. How many units have any of these initiatives produced in CB2?
Oh, in
Maybe
CB2.
That's an unfair question to ask you because it's CB2 specific, but I think it's like none. One.
You know what?
How many buildings, I should say?
I actually did something. I did something, from the period
Yeah, that's it.
2014 through 2021, looking at affordable housing by community district, and I will pop that up. Maybe not right now, but I have the answer to that question.
I think, yeah, and I think that is very key to our response to this.
Fair.
And I'd love to hear the other things the other half a dozen priorities that you think we should put in our reso. What are the main points we should focus on?
I think that's something that well, okay, so let me say this is that one of the things I've heard is that the CPC will be accepting comments until July 24th. I don't know if they've told you that, but they've been telling other community boards that. I think you should take as much time as you need to actually carefully craft a really good resolution. Take all the time that they give you on that. And, I think, I don't have a list of things that I would tick off for you. Really, I want to respond to your comments, right? Or your questions, things that you are concerned about. That's really what's most appropriate for me. I know I brought up this authorization as something that you all should be concerned about, but that's only because no one else has been talking about it, right? and there are things like that that no one else is talking about, and like the standards for residential development changing. That is, as somebody who appreciates the history of the city, there's a certain form of New York City, and that form has been shaped by zoning regulations that have been in effect since 1916, right? And we're changing some of those, right? And what does that do to the city as that we live in? It's that, again, that's my concern. That might not be your concern.
I just, before Matthew goes, I just want to point out to the many attendees who are here, and we're grateful for your participation. I just want to make sure you can hear me, but we're not taking comments from the public. We see your comments in the chat. And, but it's only the committee members and board members for this session. So thank you for your understanding. Matthew, did you have a question?
I have two. I'll ask them one at a time, and you're welcome to take other people in between. Do you think of housing in Manhattan as a Giffen good?
Is it what? What? Say it again.
Can you define your term?
A Giffen good is a good where as supply. I'm surprised. I am surprised that you don't know what a Giffen good is. It's a product where as you increase supply, the price rises. It's like a unicorn in economics.
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, listen, I'm not
I'm
a
surprised
housing.
that you're making me get mad, but yeah.
I'm not a housing specialist, right? I mean, all I know is that if you build affordable rent-regulated housing, you get rent-regulated housing. And what happens in the market, on the market side of things, is kind of magic, right? The market has its mind of its own, and I don't know how there's a supply and demand going on there, and it's a lot of things impacted. So I can't really comment.
I believe it's spelled GIF as in Frank, F as in Frank.
Yes.
Thank you.
Giffen good.
Giffen good.
Yes,
We were-
Giffen. Sorry.
Yeah. I see it. Thanks to Wikipedia.
Oh,
Do you want my second question, or you want to take somebody else?
Absolutely. You're next. You got two
I
bites.
appreciate it. So I do appreciate all of your points, and would agree with some of them, but would phrase them as the object of what the changes are and not a side effect. Right. I think of this as specifically designed to decrease regulation in order to decrease the time that an application sits in order to get housing on the market faster. If that is the goal, assume in the world that accept the premise for a moment. If that is the goal, how would you rate this? The changes?
Oh, well, I would disagree with the basic premise, because
But assuming that you accept the premise.
well, okay, hold on, Matthew. So we have an as of right development framework, right? And what we're doing here is we're changing the rules, zoning rules, to that as of right development framework. We're going from this many rules to this many rules, and it's really a marginal. That it's extremely marginal in terms of developing plans that comply with this or comply with that. It's really more about capacity, right? This is about being able to build housing and residential floor area in places where you can't now. And there, it's like, I would say, yeah, you could put a lot more floor area. This is like, in terms of like, the fact that it's lesser regulations. People know how to do plan review at the Department of Buildings. If it takes, three plan examinations instead of 2, that's marginal. This is really about capacity, putting more floor area everywhere, and that's what makes it impactful, not the changes to regulations.
David and then Ryder. Oh, okay, David, Ryder.
There you go. George, I want to thank you. I'm listening very closely to your learned and erudite presentation, and it's very interesting. But my takeaway is that regardless of what the mayor is trying to say, that the city of Yes will increase affordable housing, it will do this and other things. It seems to me that it has nothing at all to do with affordable housing. It will not increase affordable housing necessarily, except for a few bits and pieces where it's mandatory. There is no, this city of Yes will not include, it will not increase significantly affordable housing. It's all voluntary. It's really, it seems to me, a giveaway to the development community, not to the affordable housing advocates. Would you agree with that?
Not only would I agree with that, I feel like I have whiplash because in the last administration, we did all of these zoning changes and it was all about rent regulated housing. How do we get more affordable housing? How do we get more, we do, neighborhood rezonings with MIH. We do infill. I was just looking at the plan Next Gen NYCHA about infill on NYCHA estates, which would be 50-50, 50% affordable, 50% market. 2018, it wasn't that long ago. And now it's like we want to do infill on these housing estates, which are 100% market. It's again, it's a philosophy. And again, I don't want to say that I have all the answers, but the philosophy is if you build more and build more everywhere, prices will come down. And that market rate prices will come down. But, I think as a planner, as a land use planner, in my field, we have an ethical obligation to serve the people who need the most. And that would be people who need housing, people who need affordable housing, rent regulated housing. And Carter, this does nothing for increasing the supply of rent regulated housing. It really doesn't. And I think, honestly, the UAP
I'm not
program.
Carter, I'm David.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And never confuse, George, never confuse us again.
Sorry. I see a name on your Zoom. That's the only reason why.
It's labeled, you're labeled Carter.
Ever confuse us.
Sorry.
Okay, it's going to be Ryder, Carter, John Paul.
Thanks. Yes, don't confuse me with Carter or David, please.
I'm sorry. I'm very sorry.
No, I'm just kidding. I have two questions. One is more about details in one of the rezoning things that came up earlier, and the second is more of like a real politic question about how you would advise us. I think the first question is informed by my perspective, which is I absolutely think our board and this committee are very interested in the addition of income restricted units. We like affordable housing units.
Absolutely.
I think we also, I'll speak for myself here. I think like there's a recognition that we probably can't solve our housing affordability crisis just with the pace of affordable housing development, with rents outpacing wages by 7 to 1, and that we have a housing affordability crisis that needs solutions beyond
Supply.
also, adding affordable housing units is good, but we need to think more broadly than that. And I think I think it's not fair to characterize it as an idea. I think it's like a well-established and growing academic consensus that increasing market rate housing reduces rents, reduces displacement, reduces it locally and market-wide. I think that's part of what Matt was getting at. So I do think more market rate housing everywhere reduces rent pressure and will benefit the city. That's my personal perspective. The reason I use this as the framing for this question is because it's about tweaks to the market, loosening up, creating slack. So I'm curious about your take on the small units, because you were talking about like lots of places in the city are starving for family size units. My understanding right now, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that a lot of family size units right now are occupied by multiple households that are living together, like as roommates. I think Pew research said that 40% of adults in New York are living in joint household units where it's like multiple adults sharing a 3-bedroom. So my sense, and this is market logic, I don't think it's magic, that like if you had more buildings that had small units that those individual adults could live in, that would free up those family size units for families. I'm curious on whether you think that's like a fair reason to maybe be supportive of that provision.
Listen, there is logic behind that. Everything you said, right?
Yeah.
It is part of the rationale that DCP has been using throughout the city, right? The idea that you can make your apartment more family size by expanding into the rear yard, or you can have smaller units that free up spaces where you have 6 roommates in a 3-bedroom apartment. Absolutely, there is absolutely truth to that.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, there is a bias in my part where I do a lot of work in the Manhattan core.
Right.
And what we're seeing is essentially very, very wealthy people coming in and taking up very, very large spaces.
Totally.
And that is damaging. It's damaging, at least in my opinion, to neighborhoods, because ultimately it's bad for urban life. It's bad for, some of these neighborhoods, and my neighborhood is becoming seasonal, where the people who have their second and third homes, leave for the season. And it just sucks the vitality out of the neighborhood as well as the people, because they've already, combined their units to be absolutely monstrous. So listen, let me just say, there is an argument to be made in everything that you've said.
Yeah.
It does not solve a lot of our problems.
No one thing will, I don't think.
I
guess
agree. Yep.
That brings me to my second question, which is advising the committee as they, I should say, think about next steps for business session of this meeting and maybe another meeting and maybe next month, is like, is your sense of how DCP will be most receptive if it's like, if the resolution is supportive of the provisions that we don't have specific concerns, but if we say like, yes, ADU legalization, town center zoning, parking minimum remove, like those things we think are good steps towards a citywide solution. And so we're supportive of those things, and we could be supportive of things that have to do with high density neighborhoods if you address these specific concerns. Because I guess my fear or my hypothesis is if the resolution is very like go nuclear, I think someone wrote in the chat, that might be more dismissed by DCP. So, but I'm curious, like, what is your real politic assessment of the kind of resolution that will most likely generate the tweaks to the text amendment that the committee wants?
Yeah, okay, so I may be wrong about this, but this is how I always recommend every community board to do it, is to don't overthink it. Don't try to be too strategic. Don't put down what you really think and make it a document you could be proud of and say, yes, this is our position. I think that, there are some boards that end up, if we do this or if we do that, and they try to overthink it. And you know what? This is going to be hard enough. You sit down to what you think and let the chips fall where they may. People appreciate honesty, right? People appreciate being people who are upfront and forthright. And I think we should all try to do that.
Thank you, George. Carter and then John Paul.
So we're talking a lot about theoretics in the whole city, but we're really focusing on our board here and our board's response. And I just want to get back to areas where we're likely to see development within the next decade or 15 years. And one of those areas is the Bowery. And the Bowery has sort of struggled. There are a lot of assembled parcels there. There's a lot of family ownership of multiple units. It would be very easy to create the zoning lots, which you're speaking of, because there's a lot of commercial units. And that's covered as Area C under the Special Little Italy zoning district.
Yeah.
And it also covers a couple of blocks of Canal Street as well. And I was wondering if you've looked at that specifically, because that's, most of our development is probably condos. It's not, rental units. It's higher end development because they're smaller buildings where you can turn around the financing very quickly and get that all done. But those are areas that we might realistically see larger residential developments that are rental. And I'm just wondering if you haven't already, you could talk about that a little bit more, help us understand what might happen there. And the SLID, I think it's from the 70s or late 60s.
Yeah.
And it's got some specific provisions, and I'm just wondering if this goes around that by making it more generic to the other underlying zoning areas, or what's going on there.
So okay. Let me just say, I haven't gotten into the special districts on this version. I will say that, I was shocked at how much the Little Italy use rules changed under economic opportunity. I've looked at a couple of special districts with housing opportunity. and it's all about making it generic. Like, all of the custom bulk rules, all the custom FAR rules, they're trying to get rid of them and making zoning districts standardized. Because right now, sometimes, you have one zoning district that means one thing, and then if you're in a special district, it means another thing. And so they're trying to make them, it always mean the same thing, which, I understand from a regulatory standpoint, but I also know that, Little Italy is different than other places. And so its zoning should probably reflect that. So one of the things I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to get back to you on that, because I have to get into the details of the special districts, and I just haven't done it with Little Italy. And we should, because there may be like big changes in there that we're just not getting into.
Yeah, that just by perspective, the Bowery is supposed to have taken off, I think, for the last 30 years.
Right.
And it sort of had little fits and starts, but the assemblages are all there and they're all for sale. There are actually some vacant. And so that's why I just bring that up.
Yep.
That's good for us to understand. And then the second part, and I think were you on our meeting last week, or maybe not, but
We had a conflict.
we got the presentation from DCP, and the underlying, two of our most recent underlying rezonings, the city has placed significant importance on commercial development with those rezonings, and you can see that with headquarters being built in one of them, and then the other was identified as the third most important commercial corridor in the city, and that's along Broadway. And so they really highlighted commercial development, and we've seen the results of that, which are choices of building commercial instead of residential. And the underlying question is there anything in this that incentivizes housing production at all? Or is that really, the city are the ones who came up with the proposals for those rezonings? Is that really the city has to revisit some of that incentivization through the underlying zoning? And, we just had a case of somebody, it was a landmark situation, but they are building a 2-story building now, just the taxpayer in Soho, and not a commercial or residential. They're just building a taxpayer. And so I just asked that because this is sort of what we're facing in real time, and how could we give some productive comments through this?
Well, I encourage productive comments on this because, as in most commercial districts in New York City, people make a choice. Developers make that choice between housing or commercial space, right? And that's not a choice that this zoning makes any easier for housing, frankly. It's like the transfer from landmarks. It doesn't have to be for housing. It could be for commercial, right? It could be, you want to make your, we were just talking in Lower Manhattan, in District 1, for instance, the landmark transfers can be of any size, right? So that's where your next super tall is going to come from. It's going to be like you're going to transfer all the floor area from all the landmarks down there to a single site. Then you could have your absolutely ginormous building, and it doesn't have to have any residential, right? It's an issue, is that if you think that you are in a housing crisis, then why aren't you encouraging the development of housing over commercial uses? Because remember, jobs follow people, people follow jobs, right? And so if you have a large increase in non-residential development creating jobs, well, then you're just increasing the demand for housing, which makes the housing crisis worse. And so I think I encourage you to put some comments in there about this, about how we need to plan for what we want. And do we want, corporate headquarters in District 2, or do you want housing?
Yeah, I guess does the city of Yes housing portion add to that incentive to build housing? And I think for us, that's a very important aspect, because we keep seeing commercial buildings being built. And so and I don't know if you you are much more into a lot of the smaller details, but that's the question. Because we know smaller buildings are generally condos in our community. They're generally, you know, focused on that, but some of these bigger spaces, how is this going to contribute to housing being built there instead of commercial development?
I think it would be only marginal. I mean, this is really about zoning districts. You want, instead of C4 through, you know, C8 or M districts, you want C1 and C2 districts. If you have C1 and C2 districts, you end up with, you know, commercial on the ground floor or maybe the second floor, and then you can have apartments above, right? This is a form that you know, most of the Manhattan core neighborhoods have thrived with. But you know, as we've rezoned areas for C4, C5, and C6 districts, the commercial uses are invited to come in because they could be just as big as the residential. You don't leave any floor area on the table. What you want to have is you want to have an imbalance between the amount of residential floor area you can develop and the amount of commercial floor area you can develop. That forces developers, if they want to build out their lot, they have to build housing. And we haven't been paying enough attention to that, or, you know, maybe now it's become more important and we need to start paying attention to it.
Okay, so John Paul DeVerna, then I'm going to ask a question, then Frederica. That'll be our order.
Hi, George. Thank you. I don't think we met in person, but it's nice to be participating in this discussion. You had said something, and I think someone before me kind of underlined it. I'm trying to think. I want to get there. Well, firstly, you said that this approach almost gave you whiplash in the focus from, I guess, moving emphasis on affordable housing to just more housing?
Yes.
And then Frederica asked a question. I know you're trying to get the answer to it. It seemed like those original efforts didn't really make much of a dent. Otherwise, maybe we would have had them more ready to say, well, they were effective. By focusing on affordable, it actually worked. But it seems like it was ineffective. And so now they're moving to changing to this new approach, which is more of a, I guess, supply side versus a mission-driven approach. Can you just kind of speak to that at all?
Sure, and I think it really depends on what community district you're in. Like, I've been the land use planner for Community Board 11 East Harlem for the past 12 years, and that community district embraced its neighborhood plan and mandatory inclusionary housing, and it has produced the most affordable housing in all of Manhattan community districts since 2014. And it's because essentially they made a policy decision to say, all right, we're going to use zoning and the help of the city to rezone areas to create affordable housing. And I can get I wrote something up for them, and I will forward it to Mark when I put my hand on it, and I would gladly share it with you. It compares all of the Manhattan community districts to each other based upon the amount of housing they produced and the amount of affordable housing they produced and the amount of affordable housing that was preserved, which is something which was not really paid attention to. So I would say this, John, to answer your question, it's uneven. The answer to your question is it's uneven. I think in like Community District 8, probably Community District 2, there have been very, very little affordable housing produced because there have been very few actions done, meaning there haven't been rezonings. And so if your policy is, well, we're going to get affordable housing with rezonings, well, then you have to have a rezoning. And so that's why we have this lumpy result. We have affordable housing being produced in Community District 4 and Community District 11, but in the rest of Manhattan core is hardly any.
So you would attribute the difference just a zoning change, and that's what you would
I
call
would say
for?
policies. It's policies. It's
At what level?
Well, I mean, it's either zoning, it's zoning, but it's also HPD policies. Like if you have city-owned land, how much property or how much is HPD pouring into subsidized housing in that community district? It's very uneven. It's nowhere near like a smear across everybody gets some. Some districts get enormous amounts and others don't.
So we could speculate if we had the same zoning HPD level support here, we might see more favorable results. And
It's going to be marginal because you don't have like the city-owned sites. That's the thing that's been producing, 100% affordable housing is you have a city-owned site, you develop it, and you get 100% to reaching to the deepest levels of AMIs, and you don't have that many.
So if we don't have that many, and that's where the difference lays in those other communities, what do you think we could do here?
For more affordability?
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, like for instance, like this is other jurisdictions. What do other jurisdictions do? So like even crazy places like Westchester County, almost every jurisdiction in Westchester County, if you do development, you have to have 10% affordable housing without any bonuses, without any like anything. And it's not optional. You got to do it. It's a requirement. And most jurisdictions treat affordable housing in zoning anyway, through requirements. And the argument against that is that, well, then it costs money, and so you end up getting less housing. And that may or may not be true, but you do get more affordable housing for the people who need it the most. Because, essentially, if you're waiting for market-based solutions to provide for those who are least able to afford it, you're going to be waiting for a very long time.
And
I appreciate the solution on that. Can I just go back to one thing before you move on from me? And then you also, I think, when you're in one of your answers, you had said that pricing with this city of yes, housing will go down. You expect that because of the supply, the overall cost of housing will go down. I don't want to misrepresent what
I don't know. I'm not going to say. I mean, it may or may not. I mean, that's the theory. That's the hope.
Right. I guess what I'm thinking is that still does make housing much more affordable for probably the majority of people who don't rely on affordable housing. So there is a benefit to the population writ large. I think your concern is just it's not enough affordable. And I think you said rent regulated.
Rent regulated housing, yep.
Okay. But otherwise, the housing we can expect in theory the prices to drop across the board, or at least not raise as high.
So I would say it like this. I would say that this will produce more housing. There's no doubt about it. And the theory is that more housing will cause prices to drop. John, the one thing that I'm a math person. There's a supply and demand equation. And here's the thing, is that what is the demand for housing in Manhattan? Manhattan is a global city, right? New York is a global city and Manhattan is the center of it. And, what is it, globally? Is it 1 billion people? Is it 100 million people? I don't know what that number is, but it's very, very large. And so until I see an equation like that balances out supply and demand, it's a theory to me, in Manhattan anyway.
yeah, thank you. Okay. This is our order. I've put myself on the list, then Frederica, then Matthew. And if I saw Ryder's hand up, so I asked him to move forward so that I could see him.
Thank you.
Without straining my neck.
Thanks.
So seems to me, George, from some of the things that you're saying, that the Manhattan core does not operate like the rest of the city. And that this, we're back to this one size may not fit all, just even in thinking about what the right approach is or what the results will be. I don't remember the Giffen effect from F10. I'm going to see if it's in Samuelson or not. But, it is true. And, Carter and I talk about this frequently. I'm sure other people have this experience. These new buildings go up and we look in the windows at 9 or 10 o'clock at night and they're dark. So it's not the supply and demand for us or our neighbors. It's as you're just in your last comment saying, it's a global supply. And the demand for Manhattan core real estate seems endless around the world. So that's very hard to adjust for. And I am thinking about something else. I don't have a full thought on it, but one of the, East Harlem lost a lot of affordable housing. Mitchell Lama lost tens of thousands of units, some of the Metro North in East Harlem. So that's something else that we have, you know, we've lost a lot of things that we need desperately today. But I'm also thinking about all the people in shelters who need housing. And there's tens of thousands of people there, and many families who need family-sized units. And how, you know, I'm just starting to grapple with this discussion as bringing that issue to my forefront of my thinking. So those are some random thoughts, but I'm very appreciative of this discussion. And we'll move on to Frederica.
I'll pass. Thank you.
We'll move on to Matthew.
So I just wanted to confirm that the idea and the thing that you're referring to is the law of supply and demand.
I think that is, I think everyone is grappling with that and what it means here.
I just didn't hear George's answer.
Well, I mean, supply and demand is an equation. I don't know what that equation is.
If you were in the room, you would know that we know that.
Okay. Who's next? Carter.
Yeah,
Are you
no,
done, Matthew? Are you done, Matthew?
for the moment.
Oh, thank you.
I don't really have a question. I have a comment that is in response to some of what was talked about. I think I can sense Matt's frustration. I think I share some of it, but with different perspective, which is that, you know, we talk about the incidence of commercial development attracts jobs, that creates more demand for housing, and then prices go up. Like, that's exactly, I think, what Matt's getting at, is there is a supply and demand function for housing affordability in New York. And in the same way that more demand with the same supply makes it go up, more supply with the same demand makes it go down. And so it frustrates me, the idea of like, well, this is a theory. I think this is just, it's very broadly reflected now in widespread research from across the country, across the world.
CB2 though.
And even New York, but even New York.
But we don't have examples of that. We love examples.
So I'm looking right now at a Pew study from last year, or a Pew article about research that says New York's housing shortage pushes up rents and homelessness, to the point that Katie was making. And it talks about counties in New York, because I think CB2 is part of a city system, the city is part of a region. And if you look at the places that have not added housing, those are the places where rent has gone up most. Monroe County, Suffolk County. If you look at the counties where they have added the most housing, White Plains, New Rochelle, this jurisdiction,
Westchester.
they have the least rent growth. And so I think, like, I'm happy to share all of this and everything that's about New York State, region, city, the world. CB2 is distinct, but we are not immune to these realities. And I think, like, when we see the crisis we're in now, where we do have 100,000 people spending the night in a shelter, and we've lost, 20% of our Black population, and vacancy rate is 1.4%, like, and rents are growing 7 times as fast as wages, like, this is not a sustainable status quo. So even if we think, no, one thing is going to solve the problem, it feels imperative to do the things that can contribute to the solution, and creating a little bit more market rate housing in every neighborhood feels like it absolutely will contribute, and it will help CB2, because more housing supply citywide will help reduce rent pressures citywide. That's a perspective, but I guess the upshot of this is, like, I think it's more than, I think we're further along than hypotheticals now, even in the last year or 2 years or 5 years. I think the idea of this as an idea has gotten far and far more meat on the bones, which is why I think this is an important thing for us to be considering.
Okay, I'm going to call in Frederica, Carter, and Janine, but I'm going to say, in counterpoint to what you're saying, we lost St. John's Terminal, where this community board approved hundreds of units of market and affordable housing.
Yeah.
We lost many things in Hudson Square, including this huge building at the corner of Canal and 6th Avenue, I guess, right there, Duarte Square. And Hudson Square, we thought would bring affordable housing and it didn't. You're using the Westchester model, your example, but as George points out, every housing development must include a certain percentage of affordable housing. And I think that's what we're probably I'm going to advocate, that the problem is market rate isn't the problem, it's the lack of requirement of affordable housing. And those of us who've been struggling with this for decades see it. And I everything you said was
I
true,
think it's
but we
both.
need, but the lack of requirement is a problem for me. And Frederick is next.
Sorry.
Carter, Janine.
Yeah, you think that, just a couple random thoughts. You think mandatory inclusionary housing would actually mean mandatory,
I know.
right? Maybe you can explain how the mandatory inclusionary housing is not mandatory. The other thing is that I know we talk about the luxury buildings that have dark windows. And the assumption is that they're purchased and that people aren't living in them. But just on the edge of CB2 at 6th Avenue and 14th Street, there are 2 new buildings on the north side with the third one going up. There are many dark windows on the east side. And I popped into the very modern glassy one on the west side. It has 44 units and it's 30% unsold. Not sold and unoccupied.
Yeah.
And I can't understand how unsold units affect supply and demand. Right? They're building or building extra, but it's not getting bought. So it's what does that do?
Either way, it's a the dark windows are a problem either way. Thank you, Frederica. Carter, you want to ask Carter, Janine, then Susan.
So John talked a lot about background noise and our luxury, background noise, and our luxury development is background noise in the city of multi-million-dollar apartments. I mean, that's not helping anybody because that's transferable to anywhere. That money, there's plenty of choices, but that's all we get in our community. And I just, George, I want to ask you a question. Were you referring on the affordability to the study you did for CB8? Is that?
Oh, no, I did something for CB8 on rent stabilized housing.
I was just gonna say our numbers for that, just so people can understand affordable housing. So this, I'll let you explain how you did it, but what's interesting are the numbers. In that between 2007 and 2020, there were about 2,000 units added to rent stabilization, increase in 2,000 units. And then we had a decrease of 6,400
Is it
in affordable CB2.
Yeah.
And so that's a 4,400 loss, just to put in perspective.
I mean, I'm not being.
No, I mean, I think, George, you did this backwards from tax data somehow, right?
Yeah, it was from tax data. And the problem with that is that, number one, it's not all rent stabilized housing is affordable. This is something that most people or many people don't remember, is that you can have like very expensive units that enter into the rent stabilization program for some benefit, but it ends up being, not affordable. So it's not a good proxy for affordable housing, especially in Lower Manhattan.
But what I wanted to say though about that, which is interesting, is if you look at it a little differently, is that 6,400 units were put into market rate housing in that time period. 6,400 units in our community board. That's a significant number of units because we have a stealth problem where we have the background noise is the combination of townhouses, which often, can be up to 8 or 9 units down to 1 unit, which we're told is background noise. And then we have another stealth creation of market rate units. And these are the extras that we're talking about, adding a little bit, but the extras are undone, month after month. And those are the smaller units that are the 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, or studios that are often taken out that we're talking about here. And then the building we have is multi-million-dollar units. And so we're an anomaly. And I think that what John was saying is background noise, we're actually also the background noise in that what's developed is so high end that it doesn't contribute to solving this issue.
Right. That's
It's going to be Janine and then Susan, but George, will you be able to send us all these slides?
That's not.
yeah. I was just, on your screen right now, this is the new construction affordable housing in Manhattan summarized by community district. I did this for Community Board 11. It's a period 2014 to 2021. And so that's why Community Board 11 is bolded. Y'all had almost none. For new construction affordable housing, 118 units. It's 1% of what Manhattan produced in that period. I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, Janine is next.
Okay, I had a question about, sorry, my son just
If
came
someone's
home.
talking, okay.
I just, I had a question about universal affordability preference, which would replace the voluntary inclusionary housing.
Yeah.
And you can build 20% larger if it's permanently affordable, but in Hudson Square, we have voluntary inclusionary housing, but the other alternative is office space. And, we have Disney's headquarters and a bunch of buildings that were potentially, in the ULURP process, projected to be housing and are not. So what kind of changes could we propose that would make, housing more likely in Hudson Square? Because there's still a lot of development potential there.
Well, there's at least a couple things you could do. You could look at rezonings that would which would increase the residential densities at the expense of commercial densities. So if developers wanted to develop their parcel, they would have to produce at least some residential
Yeah.
units.
Well, if this was just a Trinity real estate filed for this rezoning, and it's basically a revolving door between city planning, HRNA and Trinity. So I don't know if that's
yeah, it's rezonings
politically
are hard.
that might not happen. Yeah, I mean, in terms of
rezonings are hard, but-
commenting, yeah.
Yep. I mean,
In terms of commenting on the city of yes housing opportunity.
I mean, there's nothing in here that will guarantee developers end up choosing residences, or at least some residences, over commercial spaces, right? That's ultimately their decision. And there really aren't incentives to encourage them to make the decision of housing over commercial spaces, other than the fact that, the office market now is pretty crappy. It's really market as opposed to anything with regulations.
But I would say in the last, 5 to 7, 5 years, that's where our biggest loss has been in terms where there's significant development, but it's not housing.
Yeah.
We see that there's a huge tower that was just built on 4th Street in NoHo, tons of stuff in Hudson Square, the Google headquarters, and I'm sure there's lots more.
Yeah, you're not alone. I know that even in the mandatory inclusionary housing area in East Harlem, they got a big medical research facility and one of their sites that they were expecting to get housing, and they have 0 units there.
Yeah.
And Janine, I don't know if you were on last week, but Andy Cantu had said, this is specific to this, he had said he reviewed Hudson Square and about 3 years ago, and that is something that we should follow up and ask him what his findings were on that and how they might relate to this. That's a very good question.
Okay, can you make note?
Yeah.
Okay, Susan. No, Susan Kent and then Susan Wittenberg.
Oh, sorry.
Alphabetical order.
Sorry. The argument has been presented that by simply producing more housing of any kind will bring down the cost. But in an environment where there is just, the demand is so outstripping the supply, how much are we talking about producing in order to start seeing that simple interaction between the supply and demand and bringing down the price? And even if we then are able to get to that volume, how much do we have to bring it down so that all of a sudden our people who are only make the middle class income in our city can actually afford it. Just bringing down the average market price doesn't seem to be sufficient when it's probably double already what people can afford to pay. And then lastly, why would a developer that is producing market rate ever have the incentive to produce in a volume that would bring down their margins? When right now it seems like they're in a position where they are maximizing their profit with every unit they're producing.
Can you say something to Susan said?
You want to respond to Susan?
Yeah, just let me add something to what Susan said. And I'm sure we all know this, that building units and then selling them are two separate things. So as we all know, developers often have X number of units and they hold percentages off, many units off the market depending on current market conditions. So it's the fact of building it and the hope that the additional units will somehow bring down the price is controlled by the developer, and they won't do that. They won't. I saw that very specifically during the pandemic, when I thought there'd be some deals around. And there weren't, because even, places like Related and Hudson Yards, they just kept the units off the market until market conditions improved for them. So that's a very important factor.
Thank you. Yep, Susan?
Two follow-ups. Our biggest loss in CB2 have been affordable units that went out of control. There's nothing in this plan that's going to prevent that from continuing to happen. And so we can't replicate those. Every time we lose one, we don't get that back. And I think that's something that's so important. I mean, we lost the Hudson Yards units that Katie mentioned, and we're losing these at a very fast rate. So that's something that I don't think is unique to our district. I think it's unique, is all over the city. The other thing that is mentioned in either the report or the letter that we got today is that if we increase, as prices go up in apartments, people are moving further and further out to get cheaper places like Ridgewood, which means that's gentrification, and then those rents go up. And so if we're only adding in, or basically only adding in, market rate units in our district, then we're perpetuating that, because we're increasing gentrification. People are going to have to still keep going further and further away. And so without any commitment to a significant number of affordable units, it's hard to see when this progress and gain is going to really happen for our district. So I keep trying to figure out, like, how are we benefiting from this? When are we going to see benefit? And I know that that's true for the whole city, but just for us, because we've been hit so hard with the loss of affordable units, as well as our attempts to build them. This just seems to make that much more difficult for us here.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize some of the figures we heard last week. City planning told us that the current deficit is 500,000 units of housing. They believe that the city of housing opportunity will produce 60,000 to 100,000 new units. So I'll say 100,000. I'll take them for the 100,000. In the normal course of events outside of this program, they believe over the next 15 years that 20,000 units will be reduced each year outside of this new initiative. But that's 300,000 plus 100,000 is 400,000, which doesn't even meet our current deficit of 500,000. So this plan is not going to fix our current problem, never mind what 15 years holds. So I think we've got to press for more, as I hear around the table. Ryder?
Yeah, I think to me that throws into relief that this plan is quite modest, and that while it's a step in the right direction, more would be better. And to the point of how can we get developers to want to produce housing where commercial is available, I think part of the reason it's out of whack is because the FARs are out of whack. The way to make it more profitable to produce more housing is to allow the production of more housing. So I think, like, part of the idea of increasing available FARs is to generate that incentive. But I really raised my hand about the sprawl piece because I think the point that Susan Wittenberg brought up is exactly apropos of that, which is that, although I see it differently, which is I think people are moving out to other neighborhoods that are more affordable than where they want to live because there isn't we're not producing housing here. So our prices are going up higher. They go to other neighborhoods, push people out. But I just wanted to raise the climate element of this because pushing people out, we think of CB2 as so distinct, but we are part of an ecosystem, and pushing people out to further away from where the jobs are increases sprawl, increases carbon emissions. And dense walkable neighborhoods are the superpower of fighting the climate. And that I think is part of why the League of Conservation Voters is supporting City of Yes for Housing Opportunities so vociferously, because they see increased density as a really important way to reduce emissions. So I will also happily share their statement of support with the committee.
But you can take the M to Ridgewood.
But the city has said housing isn't the most important
Matthew's
to
up.
us, and that was what they said in the Soho rezoning. They said commercial is equally important, and that's why we had so much issue with it, which is why the stacked buildings there are not, ground floor commercial and residential above. It's number of floors of commercial with some mixed in residential without affordability. These are the underlying issues.
I think there's
and those are
recognition now about the importance of residential
areas. And that's what I keep coming back to. Where is development realistic in our board, and what's specifically going on in those specific area to increase substantial amounts of housing? And every place we see it, it doesn't go towards housing regularly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the issue, because those are the areas where you can make a dent.
Mm-hmm.
The adding a little bit of housing everywhere, it's not really for the reasons you said before, is it's condo development and nobody wants rental units to go with that. It's too complicated on smaller development. And so we may be an outlier, but we're also an outlier in the thumbs not on the scale, which we discussed, last month for residential development. And that is COVID lasting? Is it not? What's going on in Midtown? Those are a lot of the underlying areas, but there's only so much that can be developed. They're not taking down many office buildings, right? Chase might be the only one that I know of that they're taking them down to redevelop them, and they go to places where there's space like Hudson Square, and we don't get residential. So it's a larger problem, but it's mixed in with a lot of other issues as well.
And before Matthew speaks, I will just underline, I think, one of the things that I see happening, I think we all see it, these very fancy law firms, very prestigious places, they always want new space. They're always taking a new office. The old office isn't good enough anymore. So that's another incentive for commercial development that is playing into this from my observation. Matthew?
I think I have a question for you, Chairwoman Bordenaro, which is, if this isn't, and it's a slightly similar one to Ryder, if this isn't enough, doesn't that logically lead us to conclude that we need to do this and other things, and definitely not lead us to conclude that we shouldn't do this?
Do what?
Did we say we weren't going to do it?
Do what?
You mean support?
Give us some specifics, Matt, about the specifics in City of Yes that we should or should not do.
I appreciate that question, Carter. So I think any of the things that we have been discussing, pick one, right? Pick one. But any of these changes, either on their own or together, isn't going to solve it. But that to me says we need to do this and other things. It just doesn't.
Matthew,
it doesn't
something
make
happened.
sense.
Oh, that's better. Can you repeat your sentence? You were somewhat garbled for a minute.
I apologize. I'm outside. It's just a rephrasing of the original question, which is and I do kind of would like an answer on this, which is it just doesn't logically make sense to me that if this isn't enough, right? If this isn't the silver bullet, well, then we need to use more bullets, right? But you don't stop shooting.
Well, you know what,
this
Matthew?
and other things. It's not this.
You
I was
mean
just wondering,
this and not this or. I hear you, Matthew. Frederica has her hands up. I hear you. I understand you.
George, George, do you see any evidence other than verbiage where the city is investing in this, in solving this problem?
Thank you.
Solving the problem of housing or affordable
Yeah.
housing?
Well, housing. Housing.
So listen, I mean, we spend an enormous amount of money through HPD with city subsidies, state subsidies to do housing. You know, we just passed 485X, which will give a very large tax abatement to new housing developments that have affordable housing. But, you know, I'm going to tell you that this is a big problem with it, is that condo units in Manhattan are not eligible. So if you want to build affordable condos in Manhattan, tough luck. You get no subsidy.
Okay, maybe my question wasn't clear then. What I'm saying is the city, where in the city budget is there money put toward housing, increasing the housing supply?
So HPD subsidizes housing all the time, meaning they get 100% affordable. They get a developer who does 100% affordable housing, FIPS houses, you know, Ascendant Development. We have this incredible ecosystem of not-for-profit developers who are building 100% affordable housing with city subsidies. However, they are active in places where land is affordable. So that means they do not come to the Manhattan core hardly ever, unless there's a city-owned site somewhere.
You do see HPD's budget going up. Can you hear me? You do see HPD's budget increasing to address this problem?
We can look at what their budget is. I know that they spend lots of money. I don't know if it's going up or down.
Okay, thanks.
But George, isn't it true that most of the money for housing comes from the feds at some point? You know, it depends on, you know, what Washington gives and.
Well, there's light tech. There's all kinds of ways that affordable housing gets subsidized directly through the city budget, through the state budget, through programs like light tech, which ultimately is a federal tax credit. But there are many, J51, there are so many programs that subsidize affordable housing. It's hard to can't just pick one.
Yeah, I hear you. Thank you, George. Okay, we've had a lot of discussion and questions. I think, and we can meet again, and Mark has very kindly slipped me a few little notes and has pointed out that our CB2 July full board is on July 18th. July 18th.
That was in response to the news that was July, I believe it was 24th, George said.
Yeah.
So whereas we previously thought that we would postpone to July. If that's correct, then maybe we can.
We should confirm that, but we heard that last week from DCP that actually they're not going to hear this until September. And so we're not on the same kind of
Time crunch.
time bomb, you know. But we're not, September is not the time to do it, but it looks like everyone agrees that we could, you know, work on it until July. Yeah.
Good.
So what does the committee want to meet again in 2 weeks and digest what we've heard and thought about for tonight?
I think we should just start narrowing down to the areas that we want to cover specifically. Again, you know, where development is and understanding what would happen, understanding whether or not that's incentivized. And then I think that George has outlined, you know, quite a bit of stuff that does have implications and also what's not mentioned, right? Which is, I think was kind of shocking what George eliminated. And I think that that's something that we should comment on because, you know,
it gives us a way to challenge it.
Yeah, I mean, there's some larger issues here, you know, as with a lot of these plans, it's, everybody wants to say, oh, it's right or wrong, but it's much more gray than
Much
that. And the hidden stuff that's not shared is concerning. Because
Well,
that's
George.
to comment on, because I think, as we've seen, right, the city council members are not pleased with this, and those are some of the issues I think that they would like to know more. Not all city council members have planning and, planners on their staff.
That's right.
And so they rely on others for this, and one of them is relying on DCP to be forthcoming on all the information.
Which one?
And for DCP to be forthcoming on information as presented. So what we have here, and also the applicability, again, it's a one size fits all across everything, but we don't understand how it's impacting us. And also with condo units, I mean, is a whole other evidence, because that's what's being built here in the smaller units. So George said you can build a building next door, but we don't have many lots where that's realistic. The buildings we have seen taken down, right, to rebuild. That's not going on. And I'm just trying to think, how can we, and I don't want to overthink it, because George's point is well taken on that, but it's where are we commenting?
Well, and I just want to make a note. George has told us that he will be able to think about the special districts area more. Because we would like more input on that. And are you on page 900 out of 1300? I mean, are you going to, how much more, analyzing do you think you're going to do? And, might uncover some more little smoking guns.
Okay, so zoning is kind of Talmudic, right? You read it again, and then suddenly, like, you apply it somewhere, and then it comes to you. Like, you fully understand it only after time and spending time, working with it. And so our plan right now, and where we are, is we're planning on going through the special districts, but really the big thing that's left undone is going through and applying these rules on real sites. So what would happen on this real site right now if I were a developer? What would happen on this real site right now if I had these rules? And that's something that we've just started. We're going to do a height factor site, like a public housing site. We're going to do tower sites, and I haven't picked them all yet. But that's the kind of thing I think people need to see, and to see not only what it will look like, but what it'll produce in terms of housing, affordable housing, and compare the delta between what we have now and what this would bring.
Well, what's a reasonable timeline on that exercise? I'm not.
Yeah, it's an ongoing thing, right? It'll be different every day, because we're going to keep working on it until the board. I mean, there's no time, right? And we're going to keep working on it as the boards are making their decisions. I mean, next time you meet, I can show you where we're at that time, and I can go over the special districts and talk about Little Italy, or if you need it ahead of time, we can talk about a memo or something like that.
Okay.
I think we would like a memo on the special districts, right?
Yeah. Memo on the special districts, I think, would be great.
So
But seeing the building examples is very important too.
if we would find them in CB2, yeah. But if this were Euler, we would be thinking about this in terms of recommending denial or recommending. And I don't think we should look at it this way, and I don't think we should look at it as that we support certain things. Because when somebody said something about supporting the removal of parking mandates and the ADUs, that may not affect us, but it does affect other boards. I mean, so I feel that we should say there are certain things that don't affect us, and there are certain things that do, and look at through that filter, and then expound upon the things that do affect us.
Yeah,
and get away from the yes or no aspect.
I mean, and that's what we did with economic opportunity. We sort of divided into things that didn't affect us and things that did.
Right.
Could I jump in just for a quick response to that, which is that ultimately, and I'm sorry to be so stupid about this, but there's a box to be filled in. And the box is approved, denied, approved with conditions, or denied.
Was that required? Because they also had that for economic opportunity and we ignored it.
Ignored it.
We ignored it.
We still have to vote on it.
No, we filled in those boxes. But we also upload our resolution.
But no,
That
no,
was one of those 4 recommendations that we had.
Because you got it.
That, yeah, that's,
Well, we may have to fill out a form. Well, we can all, I mean, we can work around the form, but in terms
I
of,
think you're missing what Mark's saying. He's saying at the end of the day, you need one of those 4 decisions.
and I'm saying,
And then.
oh.
Right. But if you got one for,
There was a much more specific form with 30 things to fill in.
Oh, that was the checklist thing.
Yeah.
And we
That's
did
not
away
what he
with
said.
that.
Okay,
that's it. I'm talking-
we're not talking about the same thing. Okay.
you wanted to say?
Yeah, well, I guess to Mark's point, like, we will have to take a position on the different provisions. But I guess I see things slightly differently, or maybe very differently, in that I think like the housing affordability crisis is a citywide, region-wide, et cetera, crisis, certainly borough-wide, average rents over 5,000.
Citywide, region-wide,
Yeah, okay.
countrywide.
And I think like we are representing not just the status quo of the built environment of the district, but the people in it. And 70% of people, I don't know actually for CD2, but for Assembly District 66, which I know well, 70% of the people who live here are renters. So they are part of the citywide or regional rental market. And so things that we can promote happening that would help the rental market be less suffocating to them is something where we're advocating for the interests of the people who live in the community district. So I guess,
That's why I said, right, I didn't see anything lost in the housing.
Opposed to that.
well, I guess because the things that are happening in other community districts per the zoning text amendment are things that we could weigh in on because they are things that will impact the people who live here.
Well, give me
you're
an
talking
example.
theoretics here. Give us
Yeah.
concrete, give us an example.
The removal of parking mandates.
That's good on, been happening.
I know, but I'm talking about citywide.
CB2 though.
My point is that the things that apply citywide, like town center zoning or ADU legalization, matter for the 70% of people here who are renters. Because they're things that impact the citywide rental market.
But go back for a second, what building was built that wasn't built as a rental building? That was, but these are important because you're playing all over the place and we're taking. Well, no, we're talking about in CB2, if you want to make a dent.
My point is that,
housing,
my
right?
point is that
It's-
You're missing the point, Carter. You're missing the point.
my point is that we have
What?
that we can have a perspective on things that will happen outside of community district 2's boundaries in this case, because this is a plan to address a citywide housing.
Parking as an example.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, so where parking minimums exist now, they require,
Which is where?
in most of the city, not our district, but.
I'm so sorry, Madam Chairwoman. I can't hear Ryder speak. And I would love if all of the other people in the room could withhold them.
A better mic. Hold on, thank you for pointing that out.
It was not a problem of mic position. It was a problem of Ryder being interrupted repeatedly.
Well, he's given the grace to speak at the meeting multiple times.
Which I definitely appreciate.
Which, as required by our bylaws.
No, that's the one opportunity to come.
Pointless.
I will, since I'm not an expert on this, I'll gladly share after the meeting, the content from the people who are about how the existence of parking minimums in the outer boroughs and the places far uptown where they do exist do add to the cost of development, end up with higher rents and end up with the fewer housing units being created. We're talking about incentivizing housing as opposed to other things. And like, it's removing that minimum allows a developer to build parking, but doesn't require it. But that's, yeah.
But I'm thinking of, maybe I have to send it around. There was an article in the West, is it called the West Side Spirit, or I thought I sent it around. That talked about CB4 cheering when they heard that the parking was, mandate was removed. And there were other, community boards that were apoplectic,
Yeah,
all for good reasons.
different.
And that's why commenting on that kind of thing just seems pointless to me. We're not affected by it.
But we are affected by it, I think, is the point I'm trying to make. But I guess it's a philosophical difference to some degree.
I would trust the other community boards to comment on it.
It was like black and white is my point.
Because its situations are different.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think,
yep.
Spoil it down and say, I wouldn't want to support something that didn't affect me.
Because you don't know.
I don't know.
right, but I think you and other people that live in the community district are different in that other people are very transitory between the community districts. And the people represented on the community boards are the people who are less transitory and are more likely to live in those districts and own homes in those districts. And so sorry?
Or rent in the district.
Well, I think there's a predominance of owners relative to renters.
There's enough in there for us.
I don't know.
Very robust resolution and just limit it to the stuff that we know the best. That's all. Yeah. And that doesn't mean being negative.
Sure, totally. I get right. And my opinion is not about the content of it, but about our right to comment. And as a non-committee member, I will shut up.
I mean, X amount of energy. So let's focus it on going deeper in the things that could really bite us in the butt.
Okay, Matthew hasn't.
You can find,
Or
help us. Yeah.
And I haven't spoken.
Oh, Valerie hasn't, thank you. But Valerie, then Matthew. Hi, Valerie.
Hi, thanks so much. I just want the committee to know that while I know you ignored the form, the committee ignored the form for economic opportunity, that form is helpful for our chair, Susan Kent, when she votes at Borough Board. They will be voting on a provision by provision basis. So while that may not be what your end product is here, and I am by no means trying to speak on her behalf, but it does make that a lot easier and faster on her end, where our vote will count.
I will just mention, because this was brought, excuse me for jumping ahead of you, Matt. If there's something in there, I would abstain if I did not feel that there was direction. I do not have to vote, even though they will go through it on a item by item basis. But excuse me for jumping ahead.
Thank you for that point of information that was not clear to the committee. And I think it's helpful. Appreciate it. Matthew, thank you for your patience.
Absolutely. Thank you for the multiple opportunities to speak. I would just say that I think some on the board have not been affected by the parking regulation, but I think it's a respectfully a bold claim to say that no one in the district that we represent is affected by it. I certainly think that I am, as a renter, affected by it. And so I can understand why a homeowner wouldn't be, or somebody who has no intention of moving out of the district. But I respectfully, again, say that person doesn't speak for me.
But that's been removed from Manhattan for a long time.
Long time.
But
1980, Mark Dillon.
Matt is talking about himself as someone in the New York City rental market who's
by
things citywide.
Like the rivers don't stop the laws of economics.
Do impact,
Well, I think,
move somewhere else.
Can we decide what we're going to do?
yeah, I think I would like,
Where do we go from here? I'm getting.
I want to know, I'm trying to think that through too. I have to really, first thing I want to see is George's slide. I want to have a moment, quiet moment at home to look at it.
Is he going to distribute the deck to us?
Yeah, is it ready? Yeah, is it ready, George, for distribution?
I will. I'm going to make a couple edits that I saw. I went through it. I will send it to Mark in the morning.
Okay, and then Mark will send
I'll
it
put it right
to
in that same Google Drive everybody has access to,
and let us know that it's there, please.
of course.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Okay, so is that going to be enough if we have homework to read that over and start with comments or lists? Is that enough direction for the next meeting?
Well, it seems like we ought to start developing a list of what our points are gonna be.
Okay,
And also it seems like,
Without maybe.
based on, what, you know, we were just talking with George tonight, I mean, because one of the things I wanted to hear from him was what he talked about, which was how, not that it fails in its idea about being about increasing housing, but what we're losing, you know, where we can't have input, how community boards change, who's making the decisions really. And that's separate from whether we think more housing will lower the rents or not, but it's about how every individual is impacted by this, I think, in ways nobody realizes. And that was his point, that he didn't see himself until page 846. So I feel like that's a lot of value for me in listening to him tonight.
well, I don't think there's,
Which isn't really a point of view, but it's a way of saying there's negative in this without our saying, oh, about housing. It's like, if we didn't want that to be the case, you know, we want a plan that works. There are problems in this plan that are really, you know, even ethically wrong, you know, against citizens of the city, you know, and taking away rights from people that they didn't anticipate, and we certainly didn't.
well, you know, in some ways, I'm reminded more of our reaction to the climate change, the first City of Yes, where we all agreed that we're, you know, opposed
Right.
to deteriorating our climate. And I think everybody in this room is saying we support more housing. And particularly, I keep hearing, and this is my own, I hope I'm not hearing just because it's my own personal belief, we support more affordable housing and the, you know,
Everybody.
Well, I think about how much we've lost. I don't know, maybe we've lost more opportunities than other surrounding districts.
I mean, as an example, what might help is perhaps that any FAR benefits should only be applicable if a certain number of units are under a certain size. You know, if you want to add, that's a way of addressing that, even if they're market rate, because then you get a different type of building that's built.
Yeah, so it's not the
That
5,000.
you don't have a keyed elevator that goes up to each floor, and nobody cares about the extra FAR because the amount that's generated from each floor far exceeds that. But there are other ways of that could get someplace, I think, for us, because we're an outlier, and that was something that John brought up last month, but I really took that and realized we're an outlier on the highest end. No matter what we do,
Yeah.
that's all we get.
Yeah.
You know,
We're at 1%.
yeah, I mean, even the SROs are all, you know, taken away, everything. A built building is totally repurposed because it has higher value.
well,
Over and over and over here, and let alone building new buildings, what's to expect a difference unless there's something.
It took me a couple of meetings before I actually realized that this had nothing to do with affordable housing.
That's right, it doesn't.
This was all about affordable housing, and I kept looking for like,
Nothing.
where is it, you know, how can we do it? It's not.
and not only, I think, but and it's related to this, I'm surprised that Carter didn't talk about this, but the FAR giveaway. It's not just smaller units, but no affordable housing. This isn't, you know, if people are getting, what, 20% more, 25% more, if your building is worth, you know, what, $10 million today, now it's going to be worth, you know, 25% more?
Why?
Just getting it for nothing?
It's also that goes to the zoning lot. And how a zoning lot can be amassed, because that, I hadn't quite thought about that, but that's a
The
very,
unintended consequence.
right, of how things are moved around.
Unintended consequences is a lot of what he spoke about.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
What if we said that in the Manhattan core, any additional FAR had to be affordable, 100% affordable? What would that, George, would that sound naive?
I mean, the response will be is that if you do that, then you know, you'll discourage housing production, and we will get less housing. But you know, if you get housing, you would get some rent regulated housing out of it. It's just, you know, it's about your about the balance. What's important to you? Like, is more housing important to you, or is, you know, some rent regulated housing that more important to you? And there's at least according to DCP, there is a trade-off, and they have gone all in on the more housing side of it.
Well, but George, our experience is we keep approving more housing and then the market takes it away from us. And there doesn't seem to be any protection against that. The Google building, the Google building.
We knew there was a possibility. It just was surprised how quickly they just.
I know, but we made a lot of concessions
Yes.
for that.
We sure worked hard over that.
So one of the things, George, you brought up is looking at things as sort of case studies, right? Applying zoning. So, you know, for example, I just building that popped up, you know, recently, 14 Fifth Avenue, I think was the address, right? That, you know, what would have happened there?
Is that the one that collapsed and?
Caused the other problems.
Yeah.
But what would have happened there if this were in play? Because that's not an unusual situation that we might see of a somewhat larger building, underbuilt. What
What's
would
the
happen?
address?
14 to 16. I think
Fifth,
it's
yeah,
Fifth
14
Avenue.
to 16 Fifth Avenue.
Yeah.
And we thought it was.
That's a very good, that's a good example from our neck of the woods.
Yeah. Yeah.
Add it to the list.
And just little things like that to help us understand what would happen in different parts of our community under this program.
Yep. I think that's a really good example. Thank you, Carter. I mean, are there any lots on University Place? What about the one up like at 12th or 13th Street? That was the Bowmore, wasn't that?
That's already built.
Right, yeah.
No, but that's an example. How would this program have impacted that?
That was as of right, and I don't think there were any.
No, but this is applicable.
Waivers of any
Right.
kind.
This is applicable to as of right, though, what the end result would be.
So if it was
So
done.
what would it be?
There's another one on University right now at about 10th where it was the audio school, you know, the hearing
Yep.
school. They tore that down and now it's a big luxury
Right, but it's.
house. Yeah,
We're on Lafayette?
no, University at about 9th and 10th on the west side of the street.
Is that where Agata, with the grocery?
Exactly, that's why it's because that it was the ground floor of that building.
Oh, George,
It's a commercial building.
there's two sites in University Place. One is
110 University.
110.
Bowmore.
that's Bowmore, and what's the Agata, what was that name?
Valentine,
Agata Valentino.
Yeah,
Let me see if I can even get the address.
What's the name of it?
There was a food store.
If I may, I will say, I'll be in touch with Mark. There are some things that we have to deal with, and I would say is like, if you think of sites like this, you don't have to come up with them now. You can give them to Mark and we'll be in touch.
Well, also, we know you have other constituents.
yeah.
There's
but
that too.
So, I mean, what would be like, if we gave you 5 addresses, would that be helpful? Is that,
I mean, listen, I think part of it is you want to find sites where you could have an interesting story. So, I work with developers. I put my developer hat on and I try to get in their head and try to figure out what I would do now and then what I would do under this new zoning, right? And it has to be an interesting story, I think. Where you would get a, big change, or maybe the story is that it wouldn't be very big change, and then I wouldn't necessarily have to mass that out.
well, I'm going to suggest another one, which is a little closer.
Yeah, I
to home,
sent it to you.
And that's our former garage, up Perry and Greenwich, and what would have happened to that, because that's being developed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I mean, I can look at some of the assemblages that are on Bowery, right? What will
Okay.
happen? Because this is the rental. That's my question is, how do you get that to be pushed, to be developed sooner? To be developed as housing, predominantly housing, and what would be the change and understanding that. I think we were told under the Soho NoHo, there's not much change, right?
That's what we were told.
Yes.
We took a light touch.
Yeah. So, there we already know there are only 4 big lots, the rest would have to be taking down buildings. but we already know that those are different.
And they did tell us it's not going to affect 388 Hudson, right? They said that.
And that's already moving.
Well, that's all affordable housing.
Yeah.
I know, it might be big.
But by our next meeting, if we don't meet on the 29th, is the 12th of June. And then do we all agree that we're gonna use the July board meeting to vote on our resolution? We're not gonna do it in
Can we
June?
just look into that a little bit more, just to make sure?
Yeah.
With the
I don't want to miss that voting on this. Well, I'm just miss voting on it, because if we miss the date, that it's too late for our city council members.
full amount of time.
I'm doing this,
I think by June 12th, we should have a Google Doc with an outline of what our points are gonna be and what are, and starting to flesh them out. Do people want to do the work in June, or the people want to do the work in July?
At a time, we don't, other stuff can come on our plate, I'm sure.
I'm suggesting that, so yeah, we might need to take the full July, but I don't think we should be writing the reso in July. We should be refining in July.
Yeah. Okay, any other points that, I've got a half a page list of,
I think Valerie has her
oh. Oh, I can't really see it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Thank you, Ryder. I can't really see your hand, Valerie. I'm not ignoring you. It's just a little tricky.
Okay. I also just add again, it would be good to find out when Borough Board is voting on this, so that way our chair has our position to vote on.
I have Borough Board tomorrow morning, so I will have an answer for you shortly.
Okay, okay.
And George, did I understand that you were willing to kind of let us know what the list of actual units produced from
Yeah, I found that. Yes, it was
Right.
like not very many.
Thank
And I will forward that along to Mark, along with my other deck. I'll forward the whole deck in case.
No, I mean the units by program, by VA, IH, MI.
Oh, okay. So by
quality and
program.
affordability. Yeah, by program.
Okay, I'll look and see if that's in the data. I know I have total affordable units built, and it's like,
Yeah,
you
but
know,
I'd like to know, like, what are these programs actually producing?
yeah, fair. Let me look at the data and see what it has.
Thank you so much.
Carter wanted a
Oh,
slide.
yeah, the slide that you put up about that, could you put that back up for?
I think so. Hopefully I didn't close it.
Here's to just.
Borough Board in June is June 20th.
1 second, I did close it. So let me reopen it.
June 20th?
Yep. Which is the morning of our full board meeting.
So that's
What are you? Yes.
Share screen.
we kind
And we do.
If you're ready next week, no.
Yeah, it's a whole deck, so I may have to scroll down to it.
I can imagine Borough Board would be voting before all the community boards get to have their full board meetings in
You
June.
do it all the time.
Yeah.
Remember that the community boards vote in very different,
So,
full board meetings are all over the calendar.
So others.
So
So
we're
many
almost-
might
we're at the
have
very
their full
beginning.
board.
that's the number, it's so low.
Well, there'll be a borough board. won't there?
Yeah.
Not in August,
But
And
July.
people are gonna hold that against
let me
us.
see.
We're
Oh, there's one in August, I'm sorry.
Okay, that the problem is that the July one is the
It's-
same.
Right, thank you, George, that just,
So both June and July Borough Board is the morning of the CB2.
That's
full
this
board.
happens more often, I think, than
It
not.
does, it
happens
does.
on.
This is not by July, August will be set.
August is completely off the table, so I would be looking at,
No, if we vote and if the full board, if community board 2 votes at the July full board, then Susan can report at the August.
yes, but the vote will probably happen in June. Because I can't imagine that Borough Board will take a vote after the 60-day window closes. I would assume that they would look for a vote. That's what they did on economic opportunity, and that's what they did on climate.
So what are we gonna do?
You also have to remember that a lot of boards don't meet in July at all.
That's-
What we can do, and we can take a look at that, And there's recommend with conditions. When you vote and recommend with conditions, do you have to enumerate the conditions? Is there any opportunity for that?
I do, yeah.
But not on that form.
So I think if it's helpful, what happened in January is that Susan was put in the same position and voted basically according with what the draft resolution, which was pretty far along at that point, was gonna be. That's, I believe, what happened in January. So it's not like just made it up. It was just, it was awaiting the final vote.
I think we have to vote on that.
But just to put into context, though, the individual community board votes are recorded by DCP and we submit them to them. So the borough board vote is, it's not like it's a roll-up vote.
Exactly right.
And so just that borough board vote, while important, I think is informing the borough president more. Is that correct? Than DCP, since the individual board is.
Right.
I'm pretty sure the borough board vote on a citywide text amendment is itself charter mandated.
Okay.
But first of all, the borough president has his own vote on it, independent, and we already know what that's going to be. And so this is just a roll up of the borough board. How influential that is vis-a-vis the individual community board votes, I think. What gets reported, for example, would be the individual community.
Why don't we vote on that in June? At our June.
It would help certainly to have the parameters, to have the guidance, even if I don't have the final product, you know.
But we were planning on voting on this anyway in June. Why not move forward on that schedule? Because I'm not so sure that the extra time is gonna, that would only, what is that gonna produce for? I'll just put it that way. Because
So it will be the same situation, though borough board is in the
Yes.
morning and full board is in the evening,
So
so we will not have a full board vote on it. We will have a resolution, but we will not yet have had a full board vote on it.
Yes.
The question is if the borough board vote's happening in June or July, right? If it's not,
I'm saying irrespective of that, why aren't we just working towards the timeline
If
that
it's-
we've set up? What do we do with
If-
that extra month?
the borough board vote is in July, then Susan will have gotten the benefit of our June full board meeting vote.
But I think
But in June, she won't have it anyway,
That's-
because we still, the board still hasn't voted.
that's.
Right.
Okay, Frederica has her hand up.
Imagine,
again.
imagine a situation where our June product is filling out that form and our July product is a resolution.
No.
Susan?
And also at the same time. The form is meaningless.
Did you hear me? Susan?
I'm sorry, you were saying please repeat.
Sure, that if our resolution for June takes the form of a vote on that form that you have to respond to, and our July resolution is our actual resolution.
You know, I will work with whatever this committee and the board puts in front of me, and ultimately it's a question of.
The thing is, we have to bring that to the full board, and that might be very problematic if we're
And there she's
just
gonna-
checking boxes and not explaining why we're
And
voting.
she's voting in the morning and we're not voting till the night. The borough board is the morning of our full board meeting.
So then there's no point. even
But you might be
talking about
voting in
that.
the morning of July. And we.
Yeah, but we understand that that's not gonna happen.
We're not the vote.
Look, first of all, I can only find out for definite tomorrow morning, so.
Why don't we wait till tomorrow morning? And meanwhile, the chairs of the committee work out a plan to get from here to where we need to be in June.
Mark, there is a form, I haven't seen it, I mean, there's so many different documents. Do you know which section of that form? Is there in fact a form?
You mean like a checklist?
Yeah.
Worksheet?
For this one, because I hadn't seen it, so
I
I'm.
don't remember it, but I remember being encouraged to use it, so I'll.
Okay,
But I
I'm just looking at the public documents.
I saw a worksheet linked from like the DCP homepage for housing
That was a little
opportunity.
while ago, so I'll nail that down.
Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Okay, I think I understand what we have to do next.
It would be great if we could do this in June.
I think that we have to.
Then
yeah.
use July as your over.
And then what?
As your,
And then use, if there's something that you have to continue to tweak or work on, use July for that, but not to finalize that what you voted on. I mean, there may be edits after.
I mean, you can't have that edited.
Right.
Understood. I'm talking more mechanical now, not more.
Philosophical.
So Frederick, you're saying we've got to have it done in June.
Well, it seems like it would be really,
July is already in, what, another.
yeah, but it's a lot of pressure.
I want to talk about it so much.
Are you anticipating a lot of discussion at the full board meeting? Or assuming the full board will adopt whatever we bring.
Right.
The conversation at economic opportunity, that was very robust.
Very robust, and we did make changes.
Well, I think that we've had some good participation from non-committee members. I mean, robust participation from non-committee members at this stage. And that's very helpful in the whole process. And it's not just you, but it'll,
I'm glad to hear
And last
that
week,
characteristic.
Much appreciated.
yeah,
I think people will have comments. I mean, we're starting to get so many emails and social media things about this that, a month ago, I would have said nobody even knows what we're talking about. Yeah, I think that's changed.
yeah.
Your ad campaign to sell.
Oh, okay.
So there's that
So wait,
also.
this brings up an interesting, sorry for interrupting. Well, I think one of the problems that we had over economic opportunity is that the rank and file, the people not on the land use committee had no idea what we were talking about.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think they do.
In May to, at the board meeting, to either assign or suggest that people look at certain things, that you talk about certain things, and you might want to give a rather longer than usual address.
Is everyone seeing the things they're sending out? I mean, to address what you were saying, they just make it sound like, why, this is so great. So if you're all, it's very effective. So if you're only getting that, and then you hear us with, be informed with these comments, it's going to be confusing for people. So I think.
But Susan, Kent, we need your input on this because, reports are, you've in the past said the committee shouldn't make reports. How would you handle this at the board meeting?
Well, I wouldn't say that you shouldn't make report. First of all, this is not a typical situation.
Good.
And it sounds like what you really just need is more information so that the whole level of board knowledge is simply higher. Right now, you've got insiders and outsiders. And I think you want to at least get everybody into somewhat of an insider mode so that they have at least the ability to interpret all the things that they're getting. I mean, isn't that part of the danger? People are having stuff just, sent to them and they have no frame of reference for evaluating.
Actually, I think this is an excellent way to increase the chances of getting a resolution done in June. Because if you take the slide, George's slide of places where our input is reduced or things that they didn't mention, and you talk about the historic and you talk about everything we've talked about tonight that we've kind of like set off alarms, it is the skeleton of a resolution.
Yeah. Okay, so Susan, I guess we have to coordinate about how this would be presented at full board in May. Oh, but I'm not sure I'll be there. Ooh, Well, we'll discuss that in the committee.
Look, that's why you have other committee members there. Somebody, in terms of the presentation, that's the least of it. The point is preparing something that people can then take and work on it and educate themselves.
We have it on our website.
That's not.
I mean, it's, no, but meaning if people aren't taking their own initiative to read the voluminous information on this.
Are you seeing what they send out to promote it? Are you getting it on your social media? Is it DCP am I getting, or it's?
No.
Yeah, it just is, the next time I get one, I'll share it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So well done and just sounds so perfect why wouldn't we want this? So, I'll share it.
Thank you. I mean, Carter, speaking as an educator, you have to reach people with different methods. Not everybody is.
Our board learning
Even
style.
board members.
It's our board members, what do you?
Even board members, everyone, there are, how many board?
They don't even read the mailing on the calendar.
51.
I'm gonna call them. I mean,
What are you gonna say?
I was gonna ask if part of the May conversation would be soliciting preliminary thoughts from the board members who aren't on the committee or who haven't come. Like, I've really had a very good chance to share my thoughts. But I think there probably are other board members who haven't come last week or this week who might have things they wanna share with you all.
Be invited to after they've heard what.
I mean, everybody's always invited, and we've made multiple things, I think, in general, saying that if people are concerned about it, they should be at the meetings, because that's where it's
And
discussed.
that's why
It might help, I mean,
Questions, right?
but I wonder just if May is really about like previewing June, whether that should be a bi-directional preview, because certainly in June, when the full resolution is under discussion, people will have comments.
they can't come here, which is where the in-depth proposals are, even including from George. I mean, the recordings are available for people to watch. They can.
I think there's like,
I mean, it's.
half a dozen new members who probably won't go to a comment.
You know, the new members alone are a reason to prepare something because they're unfamiliar with our process. This is,
Yeah, even the process, not never
Including
mind the
to have come
material.
here if they have thoughts, which I.
Well, the Listerman and the Seagull persons.
Erring on the side of educating our fellow board members and being generous with the information is probably the best MO, and being stingy and cheap with the information is probably not a good idea.
Thank you, Matt. That's really,
board meeting or?
I'm talking about the May board meeting.
Yes.
If it's gonna be stuff-
Okay. It sounds as if we could have, would someone make a motion to adjourn, please?
Yes, I'll make a motion.
not allowed to.
the-
You know what I'm saying?
All those in favor? Okay.
The motion does it.
Thank you, George.
Thank you very much, George. Appreciate it.
Right.
Thank you all. Bye now.
It's not the place you
Yeah,
wanna do
no,
that.
I think that's.
But maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe if we do that other meeting, that's